Welcome everyone, stealthyshiroean here, and I'm back with another devlog. In the last one, I talked about a project I was working on and wanted to share more about the game. A fuller picture of the game's story, a note on the art and limitations that come with it, and then a look into the game's overarching level design. And the said project now has a name, which I'm sure you've already seen from the title. But yes, the game's name is Sleep Tight, Little One. Sleep Tight is about a young girl having a nightmare. In her dream, she's trying to recover her stolen teddy bear because she believes it to be the way for her to escape. Throughout her journey, she'll travel to different areas of her nightmare escape and encounter various obstacles that are in some way embodiments of her fears. I'll talk more about that in another video, but for now, that's essentially the story. Originally, the game I set out to make wasn't going to have a story and was going to be really simplistic in scope. I wanted it to be something that I could finish, but at the same time I didn't really have much of a stake in it besides completing the project. The desire to make games for myself has always come from being able to tell a story. Games are powerful in that sense to me, even ones with barely any story at all. My brain is still firing off some sort of loose narrative in my head. So naturally, I couldn't shake the idea that this game needed some sort of story. After a bit of thinking, some consultations with ChatGPT, and brainstorming with my wife, I came up with something that I actually liked. It's still in its rough stages, but I think it makes the game more interesting for the player. Some of you may know, but I'm a father as well. Currently, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. She's at that age now where some things have started to frighten her as she develops a better sense of her surroundings, a sense of safety, and understanding of emotions. In a small part, I channeled her in the development of this game. It's given me a much larger interest in this project than I originally had, and has made me want to put a lot more love into it, rather than just to get it out there and move on to the next one. These changes to the story have created a larger scope than I originally intended for the game, and pose some design challenges that I'll need to get over. However, at the end of the day, I think this is more important to me as it lets me be more invested in my work, even at the cost of an increased scope. I want to be upfront here and say that all the art in the game is not mine, but instead used from free assets I found either on opengameart.org or itch.io. Some of the assets I'll be using may be modified, but I imagine there will be none or very little in the way of art created entirely by myself. I would love to make my own art for a game one day, and I imagine it will be something I do in a near future project. For Sleep Tight though, I wanted to concentrate on the other aspects of game design and primarily finishing the game. If I include art into the equation, it will take a much longer time since I don't really have any sort of artistic skill at the moment. But while I am immensely grateful for the many artists who allow their work to be used at no cost, it does create design limitations for me. The biggest hurdle is trying to find assets that have a somewhat consistent style and feel like they could work together. For instance, with the ruined castle-looking tile set that's been showcased on screen, I originally thought I would just create the whole game set in a castle. Every 5 levels or so could have a different room thematic like a dungeon, dining area, library, and so on. The challenge was that I didn't have the different clutter items to populate these rooms and make them look as such. I might have been able to find things like bookcases or tables, but they more than likely wouldn't have matched very well with the tile set being used. This is one of the key reasons why the little girl will travel to other locations other than just the castle. Like this forest here. Despite this, I actually liked how this limitation created, in my mind, a stronger game. Or will hopefully make it stronger. Being tossed into different locations randomly is in line with the volatile state of dreaming and how things can suddenly change. Anyway, there's going to be challenges on the art front, and unfortunately some things will probably look a bit janky, but I want to try my best to keep it as unobtrusive to the player as possible. Some other obvious limitations would be my own coding skills and lack of knowledge with various things in Unity or tools for it. I'd like to do a few different things in the game that I've never done before. I think these can be easily, or maybe not so easily, overcome by just trying to work the grind and doing research. I'm not really too worried about these limitations because I know that I'll more than likely be able to figure these things out, and by doing so will help me grow as a game developer. At its core, the game is a 2D top-down action game where the player progresses through levels by getting to the exit. Each level has a series of enemies and obstacles that the player needs to get past. The catch is the player's only interaction are to move. There's no jumping, combat, or any sort of skills or powers in the game. In part, this was to keep the scope small, but it also felt like a good constraint story-wise as the main character is a little girl, and also gameplay-wise because it forces the player to be more careful. With movement being the only form of player interaction with the game, there is the challenge on how to make this fun, and that is, of course, with the obstacles in the level. In the first stage of probably 4 levels, the player has to deal with patrolling ghosts and ones that can chase the player, with changes to variables like speed and pause times for the ghosts when they stop, as well as level design elements like tight corners and pitfalls. I hope that I could create something that will be fun. Much of the player's choice will be decided on proper timing and quick reflexes. I know this type of gameplay is very frustrating for me though, so one thing I wanted to keep in mind for all levels is that they are short and quick. If the player fails and has to start over, then it's not quite as painful because they know it was very little time lost. Furthermore, I realize that these few things to the gameplay won't be enough. Or, it could be, but I want to keep things interesting for the player. I follow the talk George Fan did for GDC, who is a creator of Plants vs. Zombies. One of the design choices he purposely made for his game was to introduce new elements to the player gradually. This way they had time to understand previously introduced mechanics and how to use or deal with them. For this reason, I decided to introduce a new obstacle every couple levels. So in this example, I introduce a chasing ghost at level 3. The initial level of introduction will be easier for the player to understand what's going on and what they need to do. The following level will be a more difficult test of the player's knowledge of the new mechanic, and then the levels thereafter will combine all the previously encountered obstacles to make for some challenging gameplay. The hope is that players won't start to get bored of the levels because something new will be introduced, spicing things up again. Also, I plan to move the player to a new area, or stage as I've been calling them, every 4th level. I've yet to decide how I might create the different levels for each of these locations, but I'd like for those to have a slightly distinct feel, such as the forest feeling different from the confined halls of the castle. The plan is to start in a ruined castle, move on to a forest, then a cave, and finally a dungeon. Which I know is very similar in look to a ruined castle, but it's kind of the limitation of the art as I talked about. But also, I thought it had a nice symmetry to it. If you have any ideas of how I might design these levels, then go ahead and leave a comment or hit me up in Discord. One last thing I've been adding in the levels, and I think it creates an optional increased challenge, is the inclusion of orbs of light to collect. And I'm not really all set on the idea of orbs per se, but for now the collectible is visualized as such. Anyway, these orbs offer an additional challenge as many of them will be harder to get or require a bit more exploration of the level to find. Each level will only have 3 orbs, so I thought having something like a score system probably wouldn't make much sense, although I also didn't like having the collectibles solely for the sake of having them as some sort of completionist goal. So I need to come up with some kind of reward for the player. As of right now, I think if the player can collect all the orbs in a stage, so for stage 1 it's levels 1 through 4, then they can be rewarded with an expanded cutscene, or some variation of the normal cutscene. I think this would be in scope since I plan to have an intro and final cutscene as well as interlude cutscenes between each stage. All it would require is me expanding on the foundation I'm already going to make. But if any of you have any additional ideas, then once again, please pitch them to me and I'll consider them for the future. If anything at all sounded interesting enough for you, then please consider following me on my itch.io page so that you can know whenever I make an update or upload any sort of playable build. Also, you could follow me on Twitter where I've just started the 100 Days of Game Dev Challenge, where I'll try to post something every day for 100 days. And of course, I'll also be making devlogs talking about my progress here on the channel as well. And I do have plenty more things I'd like to talk about, but for fear of letting this video go on too long, I think here's a good place to stop. In the future, I'll go more into detail about what I'm designing for the game. Let me know if you're following a similar journey or whatever it is you guys might be working on, game dev or otherwise. If this helped you in some small way, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.